It's a great morning. We had Dove on the phone a little. Oh, really? Okay. Next time, I'll learn it with you. Okay. I'll give you the sources to go over it. That would be okay. Okay, Chevra? Erev Chag Sameach to everyone. I've actually asked the entire staff to come in because what I have to say today is very, very much built into the mission, certainly a core value of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. We pride ourselves that all of our students have to carve out their own paths and follow their own dreams. Nonetheless, there are specific values that are intrinsic to what Chovevei Torah is all about. And therefore it's something that I wanted everyone to hear and to consider. And the staff so much helps us in presenting who we are to the larger world, that I think that there are times like this, and there'll be other times as well when we're talking about these core values, that everybody will be coming together. Today is, of course, Yom HaZikaron, appropriately the day before Yom Haatzmaut. In America, Memorial Day, when I grew up, was the day to go to double headers. And in too many parts of America, here at Fata'ai Ani Maskir Hayom, we are living in America, and we have to show Hakarat HaTov to the American government, to the American military, whatever one's politics. Every day there are people who are falling and defending America and American values. And Memorial Day in America, I believe, should be taken much, much more seriously. I'm thinking now at the shul, at the bayit, to actually every week call out the names of American soldiers who have fallen this past week. And every week there are American soldiers who fall. In Israel, Yom HaZikaron is truly, truly a day of deep reflection and profound, profound sadness. I've always been, throughout my rabbinate, a very strong supporter of Medinat Israel. At countless rallies, I would call out, Ashrei ha'am sheyesh lo tzava kitzva hagana liYisrael. Ashrei ha'am sheyesh lo tzava musari kitzva hagana liYisrael. Blessed be the nation that has as its army the Israeli Defense Forces. And while there are moments that we make mistakes, individuals make mistakes, but as an army, as a collective unit, Israel's army is an army truly of purity of arms, a highly ethical, a highly moral army. But lately, with our grandson now in the army, and our daughter Ilana has 9 children. She and Mikey have 9 children, 7 boys and 2 girls, and Gilad is a very motivated young man, and he wanted to be in Chativat Golani, and he got into the Golani Brigade, and then he made the cut, and he got into an elite unit called Egos. It's tough stuff, very tough stuff. You should know that Allison is now in Israel, because her brother, who graduated in American college, was inspired to go to Israel, and he joined the Israeli Air Force. And he is in one of the elite units of the Air Force, and his mission, his platoon, their responsibility is to find pilots who, God forbid, are taken down. And so he climbs down rocks, holding on to ropes, and Allison's brother, you should give her a real mazel tov when she returns, is today or tomorrow going to be receiving a presidential award. He's been voted the Mitzdayin of his Pluga, the top officer, the top soldier in his unit. Our daughter Ilana sent us an email last night, and Ilana is the kind of person who only sees the world as beautiful. She has this kind of natural neshama of being so constantly up. And this is what her email said. She said, Dear Ima and Abba, I just came back with Mikey from a Tekez Yom HaZikaron. I came back from a Memorial Day Tekez. All over the TV, there are portraits of fallen soldiers. I just can't talk on the phone. Good night. That is so unlike Ilana. But it reflects what a mother goes through. So if you'll take a look at the last midrash on your sheets, I wanted to offer this midrash as an expression of gratitude and hope that one day it's a dream, it's a pipe dream, but if you don't dream, you don't live, that one day there won't be a necessity for an army in the Jewish state. There'll be real peace. But the Midrash Tehillim reads, Mashal la'av uben shayu malchim baderech. One can compare this to a father and a son who were walking. V'nit yageya haben, and the son tires. V'ama la'av, and the son says to the father, we've been walking so long. We've been walking so long. Abba, Abba, hechan hi hamedina. Where is the state? Where is the city? Amalo, the father turns to the son and says, Bini, siman ze yihye biyadcha. This is the sign that you're coming close to the city. Imra'ita beta kfarot. When you see the cemetery, lifanecha, when you see the cemetery, harei hi hamedina krova lecha. Then you know you are close to the city. There is no city in Israel, there's no kibbutz in Israel, there's no moshav in Israel that doesn't have on its outskirts a cemetery. And in virtually every of those cemeteries, unfortunately, the graves of young men, young women, many of them your age, who didn't want to die. That wasn't their mission. The mission is not to suffer, the mission is not to die. But the mission is to have a state. But built into that mission of having a state is the reality, is that there will be those who fell. It's 10 years ago that the Park Hotel massacre occurred. And I remember doing a National Fox debate with the lawyer of Hamas, because the then Prime Minister of Israel, Sharon, ordered the army to go into Jenin. That was the pushback. That was the final straw. And all over the media, people were screaming, the Israeli army is involved in a massacre. And we did this national debate. His name is Cohen, a Jew. He was the lawyer for Hamas. And he beat me up. He beat me up because he was just foaming. And it was difficult to get a word in edgewise. I learned something that day. But he kept saying, it's a massacre, it's a massacre. And now we know the truth. The truth was that when we went in, the Tzava could have taken out Jenin from the air. Instead, it went house by house by house. And in the process, 29 soldiers lost their lives. And I was standing in Tirat Tzvi, standing next to the Robinsons. Matan Robinson with his family made Aliyah. Matan Robinson was one of those soldiers. House to house to house. And he was killed in that Jenin battle. And those of you who are familiar with Moshava in Indian Orchard, you probably know that the Bet Midrash at Moshava is called the Matan Robinson Bet Midrash. And I wanted to mention Matan's name. I said to Gilad, before I left Israel the last time, and I'm on my way to Israel soon, I want to be at his Hashba'ah, I said to him, Gilad, you couldn't be a jobnik? And he looked at me and he said, Sabi, you're not proud of me? I said, Gilad, I'm very, very proud of you. I'm very proud of you. But I want you to be here. I want you to be safe. And I want all of the Chayalim and I want all of the Chayalot to be safe. So with that, I want to say a few words about Yom Haatzmaut, and specifically I want to say a few words about religious Zionism. And if there is a critique I have about the yeshiva. And yeshiva for me is family. I don't see any negatives. That's the way it is. But if there is a critique, and I'm talking to myself and I'm letting you listen, it's we should do better when it comes to connecting more powerfully to the message of religious Zionism and the message of Medinat Israel. I'd like to say a few things about religious Zionism in the few moments that I have left. I may go over a few moments, but this, I believe, is very important for the yeshiva. Religious Zionism, I believe, is based on the Am Skula idea, on the chosen concept idea, which is a very difficult and we know loaded concept, extremely, extremely difficult. And there are those who maintain, Rav Yehuda Halevi, it's found in the Tanya, it's found in a whole undercurrent of literature, that chosenness has something to do with intrinsic soul superiority of the Jew. Chosen because there's something spiritually, soulfully superior in Jewishness. Those with whom I've had a pleasure to study know that while we put that on the table, and it's important to understand where it's coming from, I believe that that's really part of what I call the Jewish underground. I do not believe that it is the mainstream approach, the mainstream opinion. The mainstream opinion, I believe, is every human being, Jew, whatever one's faith, whatever one's race, whatever one's nationality, whatever one's religious commitment, we are all created b'tzelem Elokim. We are all committed, and we all created in the image of God. What chosenness has to do with is not soul superiority, which I think could be very, very dangerous. Could be very dangerous, and in certain circles, and I was very, very much a part years back of those circles. It could be dangerous because it could lend itself to, God forbid, having almost racist attitudes, looking at others as being inferior. That's not what Yahadut is about from my perspective. Chosenness is not about soul superiority. It is rather about Am Yisrael having a unique mission, a unique contribution to make to the larger world. It's a unique contribution as it's spelled out in Breshit, V'shamru derech Hashem, lasot tzedakah u'mishpat. It's a very unique mission, as the Navi says, as Yeshayahu says, to be an Or LaGoyim. This, for me, is most beautifully articulated by the Sefarno, number one, on Vatem Tiuli Mamlechet Kohanim. Says the Sefarno, Uvazet tihiyu skula mikulam. This is what makes you a treasure from all of them. Ki tihiyu mamlechet kohanim lahavin ulahorot lechol hamin ha'enoshi likro kulam b'shem Hashem. The mission of Yahadut is to bring ethical monotheism into the world. And what we're learning in the Bet Midrash is a critical part of that mission, of Likro B'Shem Hashem. How it specifically fits in, that's part of the challenge. But as the Sefarno says, in this fashion you will be the treasure of them all by being a kingdom of priests to understand and teach the entire human race that all shall call in the name of Hashem and serve Him in one accord. Now that is a loaded term. To call B'Shem Hashem means not only to call out in the name of God, because there are many people in the name of God who do terribly abusive things, but it's to call out in the name of God, V'shamru derech Hashem, lasot tzedakah u'mishpat. This mission of bringing ethical monotheism into the world, I believe, is inextricably linked to the land itself. Where does this happen? Where does this framework of being an Am Skula, of being an Or LaGoyim, where does it unfold? Because on a certain level, they seem to be contradictory. If our mission is to be an Or LaGoyim, then we should be a light to the nations everywhere. There should be no central land. Why does the mission begin with God telling Abraham, who's of course with Sarah, Lech lecha el haaretz asher areka? If the mission is Likro B'Shem Hashem, then let's set up these centers. Indeed, there are these centers all over the world. If we're going to converge into one place and we're not spread around the world, does not that contradict the idea that we are to be a light to the larger world? And indeed, there is much discussion about this, certainly in what can be called the modern Zionist movement, going back to the 19th century, the late 19th century, and the 20th century. Let me just give you an example on the opposite extremes. For a moment, let's talk about Rabbi Judah Magnus, Dr. Judah Magnus, and Jabotinsky. Judah Magnus was an Oleh from America. In 1925, he became the president of Hebrew University. He was a very, very strongly committed Reform Jew. And he lived in Israel. But he wrote, and it appears in letters that he wrote to the New York Times, that he couldn't reconcile the concept of being an Or LaGoyim with there being a Jewish land. So notwithstanding that he lived in Israel, he was the president of Hebrew University, he says that Israel should not be a Jewish land. It should not be a Jewish state. It should not be a Jewish state. It should be a binational state. It should be a pacifistic state. And it should be disarmed. It should be an international kind of place, an international Jerusalem which spreads beyond. That's one extreme. One way to handle how you reconcile land with the concept of being an Or LaGoyim is you look at the land and you say it's not particularly Jewish. Jabotinsky, I think, was on the other extreme. The way he reconciled the two is he said, look, we need a Jewish land, and if it's going to be at the expense of an international mission of Or LaGoyim, so he said, and so he wrote, so be it. The religious Zionist movement was very, very much influenced, of course, by Rav Yitzchak HaKohen Kook. And this basically is what Rav Kook wrote, although, of course, his writings are, he was a prolific writer, writing volume after volume. This, in my words, is what he says. He says that Israel, it's my formulation, Israel is not only a place of guaranteed political refuge. You know, one of the first laws introduced in Israel was the Chok HaShvut, the law of return. How many times have I been on the radio debating with people supporting the Arab position who would turn to me and say, you're a racist. Israel's a racist country. How else do you explain the law of return? How do you explain the law of return that a Jew is given immediate citizenship and an Aravi and non-Jews are not given immediate citizenship? I said, well, anybody can become a citizen of Israel. In fact, it takes 3 years. In America, it takes 5 years. They said, that's not the point. How come it is that a Jew gets immediate citizenship and you don't? Well, but you can look at it differently. That during the Shoah between 1933 and 1941, Oto Ish, the Third Reich, I don't want to say his name here in front of the Aron, he was not out to murder Jews at that point. What he wanted to do was be rid of Jews. There was only one problem. What was the problem? We had nowhere to go. And in a profoundly religious statement, one of the first laws drafted by the Knesset is never again. Never again will that occur. There will always be a place of Jewish refuge. That's what the Chok HaShvut has to do with. Chok HaShvut says, even though I'm coming to Israel for the first time, Kabbalistically, this is not what the law says, but Kabbalistically, I've already been there. I've already been there. I remember when our dove, Avita Sharansky, used to live at our home, when she was protesting on behalf of Natan, and Dov was a little boy then, and asked whether he could interview Avital for his elementary school class. And he did so, and he comes to me, and Dov says, Abba, I don't understand Avital. She didn't tell me the truth. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I went to Avital, and I asked her where she was born. She said she was born in Jerusalem. You told me, Abba, she wasn't born in Jerusalem. She was born in Moscow. She was born in Moscow, and she's advocating for exit for her, you know, that she wanted to leave, and her husband wanted to leave. I went up to Avital, and I said, Avital, you know, he's a young boy. He's very impressionable. He asked you where you were born. You didn't tell him the truth. She said, I did tell him the truth. I was physically born here. But I really believe every Jew, mystically, we're in Eretz Yisrael. We're born in Eretz Yisrael. That's the concept. The law of return is, you think you weren't there, You were there. You're returning there. But for Rav Kook, Israel is not the only place of guaranteed political refugees, and we all know what's happening around Israel today. Israel is facing some very serious military challenges. But that's not what Israel is about. Israel is not only about a place where we can perform more mitzvot, because there are many mitzvot atzliot ba'aretz. No. Israel is not only about a place where there is probably a greater guarantee of spiritual continuity, because in the Golah the rate of intermarriage and assimilation is so great, with all the challenges we have in Israel with Russian Jews, hundreds of thousands who are not Jewish, but the rate of intermarriage and assimilation of Jews in Israel is far, far less than it is here in America or elsewhere. No, that's not what Israel is about. Here it is. Israel is the place. It is the only place where we have the political sovereignty and the judicial autonomy to potentially, we're far from it, but to potentially be true to our mission of being an Or LaGoyim. There are great Or LaGoyim communities around the world. There are pockets of these communities, great pockets, all over America, all over the Golah. There are communities that really raise that banner of being model communities. Rabbi Kanevsky's community is a model community, I believe. Rabbi Lopatin's community is a model community. And there are other communities, some within the Orthodox denominations, some outside of the Orthodox denominations. There are such communities. But I believe that what Rav Kook said, and I want to say this clearly, the only place where the national destiny of Am Yisrael can be carried out, the national destiny of Am Yisrael can be carried out, that only place is in Eretz Yisrael. And Eretz Yisrael, the very system of Eretz Yisrael, has the potential of being that place from which the mission of Am Skula, from which it can emerge. Let's take a look at number 2. This is the longing to deliver humankind from the terrible suffering of spiritual and material troubles and bring it to a life of freedom, full of splendor and sensitivity, illuminated by the divine idea to cause all men and women to prosper. For the fulfillment of this longing, it is really necessary that this society should possess a political and social state with a seat of national government at the peak of human culture, a wise and understanding people and a great nation, and the absolute godly idea should reign there, reviving the people and the land with its life. Or as he writes, Eretz Yisrael einena davar chitzoni, kinyan chitzoni le'umah. Israel is not external. Eretz Yisrael is part of the very essence of our nationhood. It is bound organically to its very life and inner being. Now, very quickly, because my time is short, having offered these two ideas, Aleph, that built into religious Zionism, built into this concept is the very mission of Am Yisrael, of bringing ethical monotheism into the world, and the land does not contradict that mission, but the land should be the vehicle through which potentially this society can evolve. It's a potential. We're not yet there. It's Reshit Smichat Gulatenu, or my Rebbe Rebaran didn't even read Reshit Smichat Gulatenu. His language was Shetihiyeh. Shetihiyeh Reshit Smichat Gulatenu. I struggle with that, and that's not the language that we use, and it's not generally the language that is used. Having said all that, there are three key points that I want to make within the framework of chosen people and chosen land. First is as follows. Land is part of Brit, it's part of covenant, and covenant requires human input. Look at number 4. Shir Hashirim Rabban. Take this home and look at the sources yourself. Rabbi Chiya Rab Shimon Bar Chalafta. Ra'u ayelet hashachar. They saw the dawn, the morning star coming up. Shabak'ah ora. Suddenly the light was splitting, was shooting forward. Amala Reb Chiya Rabba Reb Shimon Bar Chalafta. So Reb Chiya Rabba says Reb Shimon Bar Chalafta, Kach tihiyeh gulatan shel Yisrael mitzaftzefet. The deliverance of Am Yisrael will break forth. At first it comes kima kima, little by little. Then it begins to sparkle, then it gathers strength, and then it spreads over the sky. It's a slow process like the sun coming up. Even more powerfully is the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Amar Rabbi Elzandri, Rabbi Shua ben Levi Rami, Rabbi Shua ben Levi asked, Va'oru imanei shamayim kvar inishata, k'tiv u'k'tiv ani v'rochei v'chamor. How do we reconcile these two psukim? On the one hand, it says that redemption, Daniel writes, will come like the clouds of heaven. On the other hand, Zechariah says it will come like a humble person on a donkey. Answers the Gemara, Zachu imanani shamaya. If we merit it, it'll come quickly. Ani Hashem b'itachishena. Achishena, anani shamaya, it'll come very, very quickly. Lo zachu, if we don't merit it, then it's not going to happen quickly. We're going to have input. There will have to be input. It will come ani v'rochev al chamor. Bottom line is, and this is, volumes have been written about this because there is a whole group, especially of Orthodox Jews. If you read the Megillat Esther on the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvot, so they're of the opinion, Hishpati etchem benot Yerushalayim, correct? That there can be no human input in bringing about redemption. Redemption will come when God is ready for it. Then it's going to come, as the Navi says, Va'aruim ananei shamaya. There's another perspective. The other perspective is that covenant is bilateral. We have a role and we have a responsibility to participate in that covenantal process in redemption of the land. And it's a slower process. It's like the sun coming up. I once heard my Rebbe, Zichrono Livracha, Rebbe Yehuda Amital, I was in private conversation with him, and we were talking about this. He says, and just remember, Avram, there's a difference between the Medrash that says that redemption, Gula, is going to come Ka'ayelet HaShachar, and then it comes up slowly, and Ani V'rochev Al-Chamor. When the sun is coming up, it's a slow process, but it's a constantly upward moving process. The sun is rising, 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 and it's constantly moving in the right direction. That's to be distinguished from a chamor. Ever been on a donkey? You're on a donkey. I was once on a donkey. You're on a donkey. When I was on a donkey, it didn't move. As a matter of fact, I tried to move it forward. It was moving backwards. He says, that's the way redemption comes. You're on a donkey. It's very slow. Sometimes you're moving forward. Sometimes you're still. Sometimes you're moving backwards. It's a good chap. Not only a good chap, there's real truth to it. That's Aleph. So the first piece to understand is that the redemption of land is a redemption which is bilateral, where we have to do our share. Secondly, whereas covenant of children is unilateral and eternal, no matter what we do, there will always be Am Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael. Covenant of land is bilateral, it's conditional, and it's dependent upon us. Look at these psukim in Breshit Tedvav. This is right before the Brit Ben Abtarim. God says to Abraham, B'nei dvar Hashem elav lemor, lo yirash chazeh ki ma sheyetzei mimeyecha, hu yirashecha. God takes him outside and says, count the stars. Can you count the stars? Ko yihi azarecha. And Avram's response is, Ve'min b'Hashem. God, you promised me children, even though it's been so many years, I've not had a child. With Sarah, this is before Hagar's on the scene. Ve'min b'Hashem. Va'yachshiveha lo tzedakah was considered a wonderful tzedakah that Abraham believes. Then Vayome elav. Then God says to Abraham, Ani Hashem, asher tziticha me'eretz kasdim latet lecha et ha'aretz hazot lirishta. Not only am I promising you children, I'm promising you the land. Vayome, and Avram's response is, Hashem Elokim b'ma'ida ki yirashena. B'ma'ida, how do I know? And the Mepharshim don't understand this. Take a look at the Ramban there, very complicated Ramban. Ramban Tedvav Zayin Chet. The Ramban says, I don't understand. God promises Abraham children, which is a far greater miracle, given Abraham's age and the amount of time he had been living with Sarah without a child. And Abraham immediately believes. And he asks no questions. But when he's promised the land, he asks, How do you know? I'd like to offer my own suggestion. And this is what I'd like to say. Avram understood that the piece of covenant that has to do with children, that no matter what we do on our end, it's always ours. If God promises that there'll be children, if God promises there'll be an Am Yisrael, no matter what, there will be. But the promise of land, the promise of sovereignty in the land, is not an eternal promise. That is a promise which is conditional. It's dependent upon us. And the best proof of that is there's still an Am Yisrael today. Toynbee once said, one of the great historical anti-Semites, he said, looking at the world in a logical way, there should be no Jewish people today, and yet here we are. Against all odds, we do exist. We are here. As Menachem Begin said to the survivors in the shortest speech he ever gave in the early 80s, he stood up in front of 10,000 survivors, the first coming together at the Kotel. He looked out at them, and he was a great speaker, and he says, Brider und Schwester. He paused. Brider und Schwester. And he looked out, and with tears, he cried out, Mir sind da, which means, we are here. And that was his speech. We're here, against all odds. Sovereignty of land, the first Commonwealth ended. Second Commonwealth ended. We were no longer sovereign. The Babylonians destroyed. The Romans destroyed Eretz Yisrael. And 200 years from now, 300 years from now, 500 years from now, that's not a long period of time. When people look at this period of time, will it be a footnote? I'm serious about that. Will it be a footnote that, there was once a time that Jews were sovereign and then they were no longer sovereign in the land? Or will it be something else? That's the question of Abraham. How do I know? What do I have to do? Because Abraham understood that that's not the unilateral promise. That's a bilateral promise. We have to do our share to make sure that that land is very, very strong. What this really says is, and God willing, there'll be an Eretz Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael forever. But there's no guarantee. Absolutely no guarantee. I believe that there's no one in this room who was alive when there was no Eretz Yisrael. So for us, it's a given. We're going to get up in the morning. There's going to be an Eretz Yisrael, the Medinat Yisrael, like there was yesterday. I'd love that to be true, because it would make life much, much easier. But the truth of the matter is, it's not built in. It very much depends upon human input. And human input means the input of all of Klal Yisrael, all of Am Yisrael. And a third caveat, and the final caveat. And that deals with the role of American Jewry, and this is what especially prompts me to rise up on this Yom HaZikaron, Erev Chag Yom Haatzmaut, to say this word in these holy Kotalei Bet HaMidrash to students whom I love, who are going to go out there and who are going to impact Am Yisrael and who are going to change the world. Look at this Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. And it's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah which I really encourage you to take a look at in its entirety. But the key line is a quote from the Pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Tzion hi doresh ein la. Yirmiyah talks about the time when the destruction will be so palpable that it's Tzion. It is Tzion. But doresh ein la. No one is inquiring after Tzion. Says the Gemara, Tzion hi doresh ein la. That's a description of what it will be in post-Churban times. Says the Gemara, Miklau, from here one can deduce the Boy Drisha. From here one can deduce that one should inquire after Tzion. This may surprise you. I don't consider myself, in the full sense of the word, don't misunderstand me, I don't consider myself a Zionist. And I want to tell you what I mean by that. My understanding of Zionism is somebody who lives in Zion. Someone who lives in Zion. It's a very narrow understanding. If you consider yourself a Zionist living in America, God bless you, I love you. But what I look at it, a Zionist is, who's a Talmud Chacham? Students who are studying Torah, and they've mastered, they become a Talmud Chacham. Now there are many people, Aaron Lerner was on the phone giving a beautiful Dvar Torah to 20 board members last night, and I was so proud of the board. You have no idea board meeting that went on for 2 hours talking about all of you guys. You should feel great about it. These are great supporters of Torah. They are supporters of Torah. But the vast majority of them are not Talmidei Chachamim. This is not what they do. They're supporters of Torah. But I think they would be the first ones to admit they're not Torah scholars. I'm not living in Zion. So in my categorization, I would say that if you're not living in Zion, you're not, from my perspective, a Zionist. You may believe in the concept. The word Zionism really comes from the word tziyun, lehitzdayen, mitzuyan. That is the central place where one can do the best in reflecting the message of Am Yisrael being an Or LaGoyim. That takes place in the place of Zion. That's the place where you can be mitztayen, if you will. But, and this is really for you and for me, I think people living outside of Israel can be broken down into two categories. I think rabbis living outside of Israel, rabbis leading shuls, rabbis leading yeshivot, rabbis on university, on campuses, wherever we may be, we can fall into one of two categories. You could be a rabbi who is a Doresh Zion. Everything about what you do is one of seeking and yearning and looking for Zion. As Rav Nachman writes, wherever I'm going, I'm walking. Everywhere where I'm walking towards Eretz Yisrael. Or there are Rabbanim whose places where they are in spiritual leadership have nothing at all to do with Eretz Yisrael. And you're going to have to make that decision. Look, I always say that if you want to serve in Israel, the best place to be rabbinically trained is probably in Israel. But students who want to serve in America, the best place to be trained, I say this with great objectivity, is of course at Chovevei Torah. But we have to ask ourselves, and I want to leave this for an open discussion, because Lord knows I'm not in the same place 12 years after the yeshiva started that I was 12 years ago. And the reason I'm not in the same place, and the reason I think I'm staying young, is because you're keeping me young, and so much of our mission has evolved, and I think it's the students who pushed me to evolve it, who pushed us to really evolve the mission. But I want to begin an open discussion in the days ahead with the Rebbeim, with the Rosh Yeshiva, with everyone, with the staff. What is the place of Eretz Yisrael in our personal lives? What should be the place of Eretz Yisrael in our rabbinic leadership? That is a core question related to the values of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. I'm very, very proud of Uri Tzedek. I had no concept really of what that meant when I started. I had a concept, but that there should be Orthodox people who are so deeply involved in the message of Tzedakah Mishpat. If you look at Spiritual Activism, the book that I wrote, this is now the second edition. The first edition, I remember debating my good friend Rabbi David Saperstein, and in front of many people, he said, Avi, do you know that there are people in this world who are not Jewish? I said, what do you mean, David? He said, your book is only about Jews. Second edition reflects that. He taught me a lot. And Ari taught me a lot. And Shmuley taught me a lot. And Ari Hart taught me a lot. And I'm profoundly proud that we're all over the world, that the Rosh Yeshiva, God bless him, be well for many, many decades to come. Which Rosh Yeshiva in the world, seriously, goes off to Africa and leads the way? I'm enormously proud of that, of everyone, of all that you're doing. In the same breath, I'm putting on the table that we have a special responsibility as well to the tzedakah u'mishpat within Am Yisrael. 2 miles from this Bet Midrash live thousands upon thousands of poor Jews, very, very poor Jews, Jews beneath the poverty level. In Eretz Yisrael is tremendous poverty. So even as one is so involved in the world, which is something we cannot compromise on, that connection to the world is very important. So I, as a rabbi, have to think of stuff like this. Am I myself connected? I'm not living there. I've never lived there. Is my kihila connected? Am I visiting, am I encouraging my kihila to visit Eretz Yisrael enough? Is Aliyah on my agenda? Is Aliyah on my agenda? For me, a whole Jew is one who may not be living in Israel, but is a Doresh Tzion. Ultimately understands that the only place I can live a full life as a Jew is in Eretz Yisrael. Am I buying Israeli products? Am I on the phone every week with someone in Israel at a time when Israel really is facing all kinds of challenges? Am I there to try to give support? Have I ever thought of Tzva Haganah Yisrael? Why is it if I'm teaching in a school, do I want to open up a curriculum in which I could say to high school students, when high school students finish here, they're thinking about Tochnit Yud Gimel, then they think about stuff like which college they should go to. They're thinking about how they can be served. The culture in Israel is a very different culture. The culture in Israel is when you finish high school, do you know what you're thinking about? You're not thinking about being served. You're thinking of serving. And I believe we have to produce more Michael Levins. Michael Levin was, of course, the head of United Synagogue Youth. You know the story of Michael. Michael became the force of USY. And when the USY Knickers came a couple of years ago, going 5 or 6 years back, he gave the talk on Har Herzl on Tisha B'Av. And it was a powerful talk that you can get on YouTube, or you can get it and you can hear it. And 2 years later, when Lebanon II broke out, he was in America. He had no responsibility to go back. He had served his time. He went back to his unit. That Tisha B'Av, that same Tisha B'Av 2 years later, we should all be spared this kind of sacrifice. But he was buried on Har Herzl. And his parents have said they were coming to a funeral. They thought there'd be 10 people there. There were tens of thousands of people who came. Now that, God forbid, we're not looking for that. That shouldn't happen. But are we inspiring enough of our kids to think about service to Eretz Yisrael? And frankly, for me, the answer to that question, while it's important, it's much less important than the question. That question should be on our agenda. We should be asking ourselves that question. In Eretz Yisrael, I want to bless you. It should become a centerpiece of one's rabbanut. And again, there are two kinds of rabbis in the Golah. There's a Golah rabbi, and then there is an Eretz Yisrael Golah rabbi. Two very different kinds of rabbis. I close with the words of my Rebbe from Kol Dodi Dofek, and I want to encourage you tomorrow on Yom Haatzmaut, if you'll have a chance, read chapter 3 and chapter 4 from the Rav's Kol Dodi Dofek. He wrote this in Hebrew. This is a translation, and he wrote it in 1956. This is now 11 years after the end of World War II. And it's based on the Psukim and Shir HaShirim, Perikei. Ani yishena v'libi er. I'm sleeping, my heart is stirring. Kol Dodi Dofek. I can see now the Rav. The Rav was a master speaker and a master on the microphone. There would be thousands of people, and he'd be on stage, just the Rav, a table, his notes, and a pitcher of water and a cup. And he'd lean over into the mic and he'd whisper, Kol Dodi Dofek. The voice of my beloved is knocking. And who is the beloved? Who is it? In the allegory, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ani yishena v'libi er. Did you ever sleep at night? You're sleeping, but your heart is stirring. Kol Dodi Dofek pitchili. God says, open the door. Pitchili achoti, my sister. Rayati, my beloved one. Yonati, my dav. Tamati, my whole one. And then if you continue on in Shir HaShirim, the lover becomes lazy. God is knocking at the door, but the lover is lazy, I'm reading from the Rav, and stubborn. She poured forth countless excuses and pretexts to explain her strange behavior. Pashatati et kutanti, I have removed my cloak. Echacha el b'shena, how shall I put it on again? Rachatzti et raglai, I've washed my feet. Echacha atanfen, how shall I soil them? And so the beloved is knocking and the lover is not responding quick enough. And this is what he writes. Pleading and patient, the beloved continues to beckon. The beloved is God. While the minutes and hours of the clock were ticking away, the lover did not respond to the voice of the beloved. The door to her tent, this is Am Yisrael, was locked shut. The opportunity was lost and the vision of an exalted life died. True, after a brief delay, the lover awoke from her slumber and jumped in haste from her bed to greet the beloved. I rose up to open to my beloved, but the leap came too late. The beloved had stopped beckoning and had disappeared into the darkness of the night. Patachti ani lidodi. I finally opened up to my beloved. Vidodi chamak avar. But my beloved had turned away. My beloved was gone. The joy of her life was exiled. Her existence became a storehouse of emptiness. The episodes of feverish search returned. She, the lover, this is God, still wanders through the dwellings of the shepherds, seeking her beloved. So my blessing is that there is a knocking. There is a knocking at the door. And I want to bless you, and I want to ask that you bless me, that we hear that knocking. The knocking comes from the world, from the larger world. The knocking comes from Am Yisrael, from Jews all over the world, and the knocking comes from Eretz Yisrael. And whereas in Shir HaShirim, the lover, when opening the door, B'dodi chamak avar, missed the opportunity, I want to offer the tefillah and the blessing to you and you to me that they're knocking at the door, that we respond in kind. V'shavu vanim, v'shavu vanim, v'shavu vanim legulam. V'shavu vanim, v'shavu vanim, v'shavu vanim legulam. V'shavu vanim, v'shavu vanim, v'shavu vanim, v'shavu vanim, v'shavu vanim legulam. 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 V'shavu vanim, v'shavu vanim, v'shavu vanim legulam.